Hey, welcome to the Ask Your Mother podcast. I am here today with a return guest, a special guest, a return guest, Keela Fowler. And I'm going to let her tell you her story, but I just want to let you know the reason she's here, which is that I've gotten multiple questions along the lines of what happens after grief. So essentially, like life after death. When you lose somebody, when you have a catastrophic loss, which is what death is. It's a catastrophic loss. When am I going to get over it? When am I going to feel better? When am I going to move on? These are the questions that I get. Do you move on? It's so many that we're going to try to encapsulate a lot of them into one episode. And the reason I invited Keela is because we met a while ago. We both have lost our mothers around the same time in life. I'm just 20 years ahead of her, but we were around the same age-ish, but very different stations in life when we lost our moms and very different situations in which we lost our moms. And so I invited her back for this one because I thought she and I can just have a conversation about what life looks like after you lose somebody really important in your life. And maybe we'll answer some of those questions about what's next, when will I feel better, how do I move on, what do I move on, do I move on, all of those same questions I've gotten. So I've gotten so many various questions about what happens after death to the living that I thought maybe a conversation would be the best way to answer those questions or give you a glimpse into what our experience is, because the truth is we can't really tell you for yourself what's going to happen, but we know a thing or two about it. So Keela and I are going to talk. So welcome, and I'm excited for you to hear from Miss Keela Fowler. So who are you?
I'm Keela Fowler. I am a creative. I'm a business strategist. I am a former teacher. I have lots of different identities. I'm an aunt, a sister, a daughter.
Nice.
And I lost my mom in 2018 unexpectedly. She passed away in her sleep. And it has now been almost 5 years, and there's a lot of learning that has happened since then. And that continues to happen, and a lot of transition of thoughts and feelings and processing all of that. And we had a great conversation a couple years back about, I know, I'm like, wow, time flew. And I love the idea of being able to revisit that conversation, having had that development take place.
Yeah, it's funny you said that. I was in the introduction saying, like, we talked on an earlier episode and it felt like her death was new-ish then.
Yeah.
So it's been like, to hear you say 5 years is kind of shocking to me. I didn't realize it had been that long. So yeah, I'm excited to hear sort of where you are. In May, for me, it was 19 years. So it's a little different.
Yeah.
And yet on some days it feels like, hold on a minute. On some days it feels like it just happened. So
it does
be an interesting conversation. Yeah. So the sort of reason for this episode was a bunch of questions around this, like this topic of loss and what happens after. So a lot of the questions were like, am I going to get over it? How do I get over it? Or what does life look like? Or what, that kind of like in that vein of what happens after I lose somebody. And it's in both cases, like some people it was expected, it was a sickness or it was age or related or whatever, or in other cases it was sudden for, like for you. So I think it's good to have both of us here kind of, because I come from two different ends of that spectrum and have a lot of years after to talk about it. So when you talk about growth, what's happened since the last time we talked?
I believe the last time we talked, I was in therapy, and that therapy continues. And I am a big fan of therapy across the board in all of the ways. I just had a conversation the other day with my dad about how everyone can benefit from therapy. Learning about yourself and how you interact with the world and others does not hurt you. It only helps, has been my experience. And so some of the things that have changed is that her loss doesn't feel so overwhelming. And when I say that, I mean, it is not the first thing I think about when I open my eyes and the last thing I think about when I close my eyes at the end of the night. And it used to be the only thing that I could focus on. It was so right in front of me, completely inside of me. And that feeling has shifted tremendously. One of the things that I've been thinking about recently, having tried to be supportive to other people who are going through grief, knowing in a more intimate way what that feels like outside of the platitudes when you just kind of don't have your own experience and therefore you just say all the things that you know think you're supposed to say or are told you're supposed to say, but you don't really have any personal experience with it. There are two things. And the one thing that came to mind early on in my grief journey was that no one's story is yours. And as much as people will try to say that they get it and they know how you feel, no, they don't. Because you didn't know that you could feel that way. And you don't even really know how you feel besides awful and devastated. And both of our moms passed doesn't mean that we really know how each other feels. We just understand that you're feeling something that is awful, that you've never felt before, and that you're never going to feel again in the same way because it differs person to person.
Yeah. Yeah. And it differs day to day, I think, too, even in your, it's interesting because as a therapist, I have a hard time when people come to me and want answers around grief because you're right. I don't know. I don't know what your experience is. I don't know what your relationship with the person was. I don't know how that's playing into it. But also there is no cookie cutter either process or explanation for it. The only thing that I've seen that I use all the time, because I think it helps to just understand that this isn't going to be forever, this overwhelm isn't going to be forever, is the visual of the ball inside the box. Have you ever seen that? Where it starts out the size of the box essentially, and every time it touches the edge, supposedly that's when it hurts. And then the one I was taught was that ball shrinks inside. I just saw something the other day that had the box growing around it. Yeah. So the ball actually doesn't change. I was like, oh, I like this so much better because
that felt accurate to me.
Yeah, me too. That like, oh yeah, the grief doesn't go away or even shrink. It's just that you expand so that it's not touching all your edges all the time, like that overwhelm in the beginning. That to me is like the only standardized, if you will, thing. Yeah. But that timeline can be different for every single person. And
that brings me, go ahead.
Oh, no. And I was going to say, and it could still feel that overwhelming in moments. Yeah. It just isn't every single day. Yeah.
Yes. And that brings me to the second thing that came to me recently, which is you have to choose to feel differently than how you've been feeling. Yeah. There have been moments where, especially at the beginning, where I just felt like my grief was almost in homage to how deeply I loved my mom. And therefore, if I let go of it, then I suddenly didn't care about her as much. That if it didn't hurt as bad, then it meant that I was somehow failing her. And she never would have wanted me to live like that. And I know that. And even in the moment, I knew that. Right. But you do have to choose to want to feel differently, to not know exactly what that's going to look like or feel like, but you have to choose in some capacity. And it's not like I woke up on Thursday and said, I'm not going to be sad anymore. It's not like that as much as it is I have to live.
Yeah, I'm still here.
I have to live. And it's not existing. Existing and living to me are very different. And the very beginning, and by beginning, I mean like year and a half. So,
yeah.
So for those who are like
days or weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or even months. Yeah. But at the beginning, it definitely felt like I was existing. Like, okay, I'm here until God decides to take me. And if he takes me sooner, then I get to be with my mom. Therefore, I'm kind of like, whatever you got to do.
Yeah.
Which, if you haven't experienced a deep grief of that nature, that might sound alarming to you, but that is my truth. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise.
Yeah.
Now, living is saying, this sucks. It's awful. And I'm going to choose to feel all of the other things that life has to offer to me.
Yeah.
Along with that grief. And it's different when you start moving towards that direction of living.
Yeah. Well, two things. I heard a song lyric the other day that resonated so much, and it was something to the effect of grief is love with nowhere to go. And I thought, well, God, isn't that goes right, I think, with that box and ball growth part is like you start out in this tunnel, you can't even, there's nothing but what's right in front of you, that existing of like, let me just get up and brush my teeth and whatever, maybe not brush my teeth, but, you can't really see what else is in your life at that moment because you're so focused on just existing. And eventually all of the periphery starts to come back into view. And it's almost like, oh, I do have all these other places to put this love. And so it's not that you're taking it away from your mom or whoever. It's that there's so much of it and you have more that you can give it to than just her and just the relationship you had with her. And to me, at least, I feel like that's what, for me in the beginning, the existing included other people because I had kids. So I had no choice to see them. And I mean, I guess I could have not, but that's not how I'm wired. But I know plenty of people do. It's hard for them to even take care of their kids in those moments because they're so overwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
For me, it was almost like that helped. It was a little therapeutic to have somebody else reliant on me because it forced me out of my bed. It forced me to get it back into the world. The problem, though, when they became less demanding of my time, grief kicked in. It's almost like I paused it for a little while. I was existing, but because I was existing with other people in the mix, I was able to think that I had done what I needed to do, the work I needed to do. And then, 5 years later, it hit me like a ton of bricks that I had not actually done the grief work that I needed to do. I just pushed it off while I took care of these little kids. So it was helpful in some ways and then just a prolonged misery in another way. So it's that like, what else can you let in and when can you let it in? I think that helps move through that existing back into living.
Yeah. And going back to what you said about people coming to you and almost looking for a blueprint of sorts. Give me a 12-step program, right?
Right.
One of the things that I should do, looking both back and forward in terms of what I have done and what I'm going to start doing or continue doing moving forward, there aren't specific steps as much as there are maybe themes, I suppose. And one of them is that I talk to my mom a lot. And what's hilarious about that is any of my friends and family are like, you talk to everyone a lot. So
that's fair. What's new? Yeah,
exactly. That's fair. But with that being said, I processed a lot with my mom.
Yeah.
And I laughingly said to my brother a few weeks ago, I was like, yeah, thanks, I'm a verbal processor. And he just starts laughing. I was like, I know. Okay. I get it. Yes. But I was saying to him, like, thank you for holding space for me to be able to just kind of get all of that stuff out. Because for the longest time, my mom was the person to do that for me.
Yeah.
And it's not that I didn't do it with other people, but she was my go-to. Sure. And so when she was gone, I suddenly had this like this cauldron of thoughts and feelings to process. And I needed to like pour them into other places. But my mom had like a cauldron's worth of space for that. And it felt like I was like pouring into Dixie cups. I'm like, okay, I think you can handle a little bit, but like you can't possibly handle as much as this. And that was really hard, but I had to start to rely on myself a little bit more and consider, okay, you do know some of the things that your mom would say in helping you process that. So you can do some of that for yourself. My therapist is a wonderful place to process some of those things.
Sure.
But also I felt my friends and my close family members expand in their capacity to give me a little more because
fill in there.
It was a huge void that it needed to be filled. And I am so thankful that and grateful that people have kind of been able to do that without overstepping, because I always say that my mom is my mom. No one's taking her place. Don't try. Right? Like, it's like she has a seat at the table. That is her seat. Don't take her seat. Get out of her seat. Like, there's I have like very territorial protective feelings about anybody else trying to mother me who never exhibited those types of behaviors towards me while she was here. There are definitely friends of hers and family members who've always been really nurturing. And so that feels neutral because it's just what it's always been. But anyone who starts to kind of jump into that, well, here's some motherly advice without saying it. It's not like somebody says that as much as it's their tone and their actions. I feel all of my walls just swing straight up and they're like, nope, don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't need to replace her. You just, you identified sort of what you were missing and you found substitutions. I don't know if that's even the right word, but like good enough substitutions. You're not trying to replace or fill in that exact role. But, and that's a really important point about healing. I think you can't expect to do that in the first year and a half or 2 years. Like you can't expect to be able to identify what exactly it is you miss. You just miss. You're just sad. But ultimately, you can get to a place where you recognize what the relationship was and what support you don't have anymore. And where can you find that in other places, including in yourself? I think that's a really good point that, you know, for me, I would call my mom and she, you know, it just wasn't her jam. She was not she was not an advice giver. She was, you know, toughen up and figured out kind of lady. But I always spent my life like striving to make her proud. And I didn't get it in the way that you would, but I knew she'd tell other people, you'd go to work and see like your picture of yourself on the bulletin board. Like, everybody else knew she was proud of me. She didn't explicitly say it to her children, but though we knew. And I realized that later, like, oh, no one's proud of me anymore. No one's here to say like, look at these accomplishments you have. And that was not something I was ever good at doing for myself. And so I had to grow that part of me, because even though, you know, people who loved me were proud of me, it didn't feel the same. And so I had to sort of cultivate it myself to be like, this thing is an accomplishment. And just because my mom's not here to validate it doesn't mean it's not. And but I couldn't have seen that in the first 3 or 4 years, probably. So how to identify the parts you're missing, I think is a really important step in it whenever that comes.
Yeah. We lost my grandpa a couple of years before my mom passed. And that was, for me, one of the first big hits. Yeah. We were just really lucky, blessed, you know, insert adjective here, to not have a lot of loss. And when I say we, I talk about me, my brother and I, when we were little. So we've had our grandparents, we've had our aunts, and it was devastating to lose my grandpa.
Yeah.
And one of the things that happened the other day, I was talking to my dad, and out of nowhere, I threw out some phrase that my grandfather used to always say. And we laughed so hard because my grandpa was so funny. You could sit and talk with him for an hour and a half and just chuckle the entire time. And I used to say that you knew something was funny when grandpa laughed. Like, you had to earn a laugh out of him. So, like, you knew it was really funny if he was laughing.
If you could get him,
Yeah. And there are so many phrases and stories and go-tos that are a part of my family's, like, language and being, that we're always talking about the people that we've lost. But it's not always that. That was a development, too, was that people are nervous to bring up the people that you've lost because they don't want to make you sad. And the reality is you're already sad.
Right.
And it's actually more off-putting for someone to stop talking about that person.
Like they
have it like Marvel movie, like evaporated. Like, we have memories of them being here. There's some
right.
Yes. How can we not talk about them? I want to talk about them. I actually don't want to spend the time talking about how they passed or like the sadness of it all. I want to spend time telling funny stories and remembering the things they did that drove us bananas. And like that's part of the healing, is being able to talk about the people that you loved and lost, because that keeps them close in a beautiful way.
Yeah, and human too. Like you can talk about them in the totality of who they are, and not just remembering like beautiful moments, but also I can say about my mom, she wasn't great at advice. Don't call her early in the morning. Don't, like that humanity. It does. It keeps her spirit alive for me to be able to talk about who she was as a whole person, because that's much more important than sort of a flowery, pretend memory of that person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My mom used to get quiet when she was upset, meaning she wouldn't tell us what she was upset about. You would just feel it in the house. And you didn't know if it was you. You didn't know if it was dad. Like, you didn't know what was going on that clearly put her in a mood. You just knew that she was in one, and therefore you didn't want to do anything.
Yeah.
To kind of...
I don't want to rock that boat.
No. Exactly. And that was frustrating as a kid. Like, what is going on? Why is mom mad all the time? As I got older, I started to see some patterns and things, and I'm like, oh, I know what she's upset about.
Yeah,
and also to be able to say, like, oh, I want to do that differently.
Mm-hmm.
I want to actually be able to say, I'm frustrated about this, or I'm annoyed about this. It's not you. I need some quiet time.
Yeah.
I wish that she could have been better at that, but she wasn't. But I think that strangely, there's sometimes a level of compassion that you're able to give to people after they're gone that maybe you couldn't while they were here, because it was so present and you had to still interact with that conflict.
Yeah.
And so, it's different to, like you said, it's not about just remembering all the flowery good parts as much as it is also kind of examining some of the parts that you're like, yeah, I didn't love that, but
right, that didn't work so well for me.
But maybe I now see how I could have extended some grace towards that situation.
Yeah, I think extend grace, but it's okay for you to want to do it differently. That's what I find with clients that struggle with, they feel like it's somehow a betrayal to say they did this wrong and I don't want to do it the same way, because somehow like death absolves their parent of any human functioning. And so there's this guilt around saying, I didn't like the way they did that, or he did that, or she did that, or whatever. It's more of a, they're gone. And so I feel like I can't say anything bad about them because they're gone. And so I just have to remember the good things. And I think, well, no, you've really gone through the work of grieving if you're able to say, yeah, that was annoying and I don't want to do it the same way.
Yeah.
Because it's recognizing them as whole. And also that's one of the most frustrating things for me, I think, about losing my mom, at least, is there are moments where I wish I could process this with her. Like I'm noticing either I'm doing it myself or I'm wondering why she did it, because I'm seeing like why I might want to do it. The silent treatment was the same in my house. And I would love to talk to her about it and find out like, what were you thinking? Why did you do that? Yeah. That's the time I find I miss her, when things happen that I wish I could talk to her about, and not just my own stuff, but like, I'm wondering about you. Why did this happen? Why did you do this? Yeah.
Yeah. I also find it really hard, and we may have talked about this the last time, but about medical history.
Yeah.
Especially because my parents had us young. And so I am now 38. And when my mom was 38, let me see if I can do this math. I was about 17.
Yeah. So very different life.
Yeah. And I don't know about other people, but I absolutely never paid attention to my parents' stages of life as I was growing up in any capacity.
Yeah.
But suddenly your body starts changing and you start becoming more aware and knowledgeable about things to look out for. So I start doing the math of, wait a second, if I started to feel this at 36, what was mom doing at 36?
Yeah.
And having to do the math to recognize, well, then that means I was 15. So that was high school. And therefore, oh, wait, mom was only that time. Yeah. And it's like, wait, mom was only 36 at that time. She was only 38 at that time. whoa, I didn't realize that that was a big deal. Or I didn't realize that she was going through that and then like raising children and being a wife. And I'm just trying to be a fully grown person by myself and having enough trouble with that.
Yeah.
So they're definitely, especially as a woman who has been questioning whether or not I want children and what that's going to look like. All the questions I have for her.
Yeah.
There's so many. And I don't know how much she communicated to my dad, so I'll have to ask him certain things and hope that he remembers accurately. But it's like,
Yeah.
there are questions that I'm like, I need to know from you, lady. Like,
Yeah. I need to know what's in my.
Can you just give me 2.5 hours? Like, you can be here.
Put a line. Yeah.
Born 6:30.
Yeah.
We can knock this out.
Yeah, I had a moment. So my mom's just the opposite. She was older when she had me. She's 43 when I was born. And I have all these older siblings. So she was young when she had those, but older when she had me. So in my head, she was always old. It's terrible to say. But like when I was in high school, she was a good 10 years older than all my friends' parents, at least.
Yeah.
And in my head, she was old, and she was also widowed. So that just added ages, just added years to her age. I saw a picture of her. So my oldest sister is 20 years older than I am. She got married when I was 6 years old. So that would have been my mom, exactly my age now. I'm 49. She was 49. And in my head, I've gained a ton of weight. I look like an old lady. And I feel like, oh, well, this is what my mom looked like. And then I see this picture of my mom at my sister's wedding. And I was like, oh, shit. She's thin and fit and looks fantastic. And I was like, so clearly she didn't get to this for another 10 years. And just in my head, though, she was always this little chunky Polish, Italian lady. It just looked round and big and whatever. I had such a, almost the opposite of oh God, I wish I could, what was she doing at 49 to look that good? I don't understand how she didn't gain all this weight already and how she didn't look like this. Cause we look so similar to each other that it's hard for me not to just assume I'm going to look exactly like she looked at every stage. And so, yeah, I really would have liked to have called it how did you fit into that dress? I mean, do not look like that. And I am your exact same age. So yeah, it was a little reality check.
Yeah, we can almost hold a certain amount of almost avatars of our parents at certain ages. There's kind of a totality of what they look like in our heads that lines up with what they look like presently, but also 10 to 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I find it especially complicated with my dad because he sometimes has a beard and sometimes doesn't. Sometimes he shaves it off, sometimes he doesn't.
Yeah.
And right now, because we live in different states, I don't know what my dad currently looks like. I don't
did he
know.
grow a beard this week? Yeah.
Exactly. Does he have a beard? Is he freshly shaven? I will find out on Friday when I see him. But it is one of the most jarring experiences to see a picture of my parents and say, yeah, that's them.
Right.
And then to recognize that picture was from 2003.
Right.
And it's oh, but that picture from 6 years ago, that's them too.
Right.
But in my mind, it's but they're all of those versions of them. Yeah, that's them.
They're an amalgamation of all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so off-putting. So yeah, when you talk about the picture of your mom at your sister's wedding when you're 6, you're well, yeah, because she's mom.
Right. She's mom. She's always big boobs and fat and and then oops, she wasn't any of those things in that picture. I was oh, I guess my brain just remembered the age. So when you get to their age and they're not here to sort of remind you they were young and cute once, oh, yeah, I forgot that you had a whole life that wasn't 70. My mom was 74, I think she died. And that's in my head. That's the age time that she was with her 70s. Yeah, crazy.
Well, that's a little tricky too. If your parents pass, which they say is the natural order of things, right? They're older, they're supposed to go first, so to speak. It almost becomes a deadline you're trying to miss, right? You're okay, my mom was 55. I've got to make it past 55 and then 100%. I'm good, Yeah. And it's such a strange thing because my grandmother's 87.
Okay. So
exactly. So it's wait, 55 the marker that I'm really focused on? Or is Brady Evan currently
Right.
my mother? And
Yeah.
so who's to say?
Yeah, there's no explanation for that. Yeah, we lost my dad the same. My dad was 51, I think, and his parents were alive for another 15 years or 20 years, I think. And so, yeah, I know my siblings have all gone through that. Like, well, 51. Are we gonna wake up on 52 or
Exactly.
yeah. I mean, that's so much of that's generational too. Well, I mean, 87, I don't, but like people live longer, so it's a harder thing to gauge at this point too. But that comes back to your thing about medical history. Like when she's not here, was it? Did she have a heart attack? Did you say?
We don't know. We know that she went into cardiac arrest at some point. But that is in and of itself tricky part of things is the not knowing.
Yes.
If I could go back, I would urge my dad to get an autopsy.
Sure. Yeah. For your own knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a strange thing because at the time, I think we were all in the same place of like, it doesn't matter. She's gone. That's what matters. Like, no, nothing's going to bring her back.
Yeah.
And also, she'd had her gallbladder removed weeks prior, and I just gotten the all clear from all of her doctors. So that was another,
right.
That's another level of what made it so unexpected is that
sure
we had just found out from her medical team that green light, go.
Yeah.
And so it definitely felt like and I mean, if depending on people's religion, this may or may not resonate with them that God called her home. It was literally her time. I'm thankful that it was so weird. I was going to say it was tragic, but not a tragic death in the sense of I'm glad that she didn't have an accident, that she wasn't killed, that there are horrific ways to pass. And I'm glad that she went to sleep as opposed to something awful happening to her, but it doesn't matter.
Right. And it's still sudden, regardless of whether it's, peaceful or not. It's still in your life and still jarring and sudden. And I think too, that's part of the whole post, process is that all matters in the grieving of how it happened, when it happened, how old everybody was, all of this. But that's not something you can even pay attention to in the beginning either. Like it's just devastating. And I have a friend who just lost her partner they're young. He wasn't even 50 yet, I don't think. Same thing. I don't know exactly. To be honest, I don't know. But it was sudden and he was in a coma for a little bit and then they had to take him off life support. And she is really on social media and grieving out in the open. And I keep watching because I'm trying to witness for her. But also I'm like, oof, this is brutal. But I want her, if it feels good for her, I want her to be able to do it. But I keep thinking I think she's trying to make sense of it, and it's too soon to make sense of it. It just hurts.
Yeah.
It just hurts, and it sucks. And also, you have to go on with your life and all of these things. And I think some of our problem as humans is that we try to make sense of things that it doesn't make sense. And yet, this might have been a piece of information you would have wanted, but how could you have known that in the moment? There's just no going back and replaying it. But yeah, it's hard. And all of that factors in. And so by the time people get to my office and they're like, when am I going to feel better? I think, well, the fact that you're even asking it means that we're ready to do something.
Yeah.
Because I think, that there's light at the end of this. And I think that's why they ask the questions. They don't necessarily want the answers. They want hope.
God.
Feel this.
Totally.
Yeah. And that it's okay that it does feel this way currently. It doesn't mean it's forever. I think a lot of times people are afraid to let the fullness wash over them because they don't want to even let it in. Because what happens if it never goes away? So, there's this push to let me just keep living. Let me look at the bright side. Let me find the silver lining. And it's like, no, sometimes you just got to be in it and in order to get out of it.
Yeah. Oh man, the funny, not funny thing. My mom used to say to my brother and I, when we would get all indignant about it's not fair,
Yes.
She'd say, life's not fair, suck it up.
Yeah.
And not in a mean way, in a buck up, champ.
Right. Not everything is going to feel good. Yeah.
Exactly. And so her death, man, doesn't fall under life's not fair, suck it up.
Yeah.
In the sense of that is part of the grief of it all is that it never feels fair. It never feels like it was the right time or the right circumstance or right. There are so many ways that you could say, but if we could have done it this way, if we could have scheduled or set this up for this person to pass in this way, once this was done, right? Oh, but they didn't get to make it to see this or witness this. Like, yes, forever and ever, that's going to be the case. Right. So like, it's not fair. That is in fact, one of the biggest elements of it is that it is not fair.
Yeah.
That wanting hope that you talk about. I think one of the hardest things about grief is that I felt a rage that I didn't know I could access. It felt animalistic.
Yeah.
I remember I was living about an hour from my parents when both my grandfather and my mom passed. And with my grandfather, I remember driving back down. I had to go back to my apartment to grab things. And then I was driving back down. And there's something about being in the car while it's moving, meaning not just being in your parked car, but being on the highway in the car with my windows rolled up. I just screamed because I had to let it out of my body. I didn't know how to do it or where to do it, right? Because you don't want somebody to, it's the strangest thing when you're like, I need to scream and be like a caged, wounded animal, but I also don't need anyone to interrupt it or to intervene or to see if I'm okay. I'm clearly not. Clearly, I am not okay.
And there's nothing you can do to fix it.
And that's the thing, right? There is nothing you can do to fix it, but like it has to come out.
Yes.
And sometimes it does feel like that rage of like, I just need to scream. And then other times it is like a gushing faucet that you're like, I swear I turned the water off, but it just keeps coming.
Keeps coming. Yeah. Yeah. My sister died about a year ago. And the oldest one that got married when my mom was 49. She just died about a year ago. And I was, you do the sort of requisite sad. And then there was maybe 2 months in, I was like, man, I'm just pissed. I'm mad at so much of it. I'm mad at COVID because it kept us from hanging out with her more. I'm mad at, I was just so angry. I still am. Like, I could definitely pull it up. But I recognized in that moment, because I allowed it in, I recognized, I never got to do this with my own mom because I was afraid of it. I was afraid of this level of, like, as you describe it, rage is the only way to describe it. It's an anger you didn't even know you could be. Yeah. And also it's okay. And like, it doesn't take forever and it won't last forever. But if you don't allow it in, that's going to always be there underneath stuff. And it's going to, eat away at you until it gets a chance to come out. And so I feel like my sister I almost got to grieve again for my mom because I allowed that anger and that's what it is. It's anger because you're right. It's not fair. And there's no justice for it. There's no way to make it fair. Even in cases where there is actual justice around somebody's death, it doesn't take anything away.
No.
Knowing a person is paying for it, it doesn't actually make it fair even then. And so that rage, I think, comes from that. Just simple injustice of losing somebody like that. I always say you're never old enough to lose your parents. Like, even now, I'm close to 50. My friends' parents are in their 80s and 90s, and you still don't want it. They lived a beautiful, full life and had a beautiful death. You're still mad about it because you lost your parent, and that's no fun. And so allowing that in, I think, is so important. Yeah. And I think it's important for other people to hear that. They can't fix that. So don't try. Just let it happen.
Yeah. There's another thing that I was watching reality television, as per usual. And there's an argument between two coworkers. And one of them was then with their family and recapping what happened. Fair. So Miranda, I'm just bringing a random name. Hello to all the Mirandas out there. Miranda is talking to her family and saying, oh yeah, like Becca and I just got into this terrible fight and here's what happened. And then Miranda says, but Becca did just lose her mom. She's going through a lot right now. And I got pissed. And the reason I got pissed is because everyone does grieve differently and everyone experiences and behaves differently based on how they do or don't process that grief.
Yeah.
But I don't know what to attribute it to. Maybe going back to what I said about how my mom could be just kind of like hot and cold. And you're like, what's going on? Why are you, whoa, I don't know what's happening here. But it's always been very important to me to not lash out at people who don't deserve it. And if I do, to take ownership of that and say, that was not about you. That was about this other thing.
Yeah.
And because of that, I get really fired up when people attach meaning to something that it shouldn't be attached to. And I had a really tough time in my work because the work was tough. Not because I was sad about my mom, because the work was tough. And I would hear people try to justify, oh, but she just lost her mom. And I was like, don't put my mom into this. This has nothing to do with my mom. Because if she were here, I'd be talking, she'd be holding all of the
cauldron.
Yeah, in that cauldron, she'd be spinning up all the stuff that I'd be relaying to her about how ridiculous and outrageous and intense this work situation is, because I could, in fact, say, I'm sad about my mom and this is happening.
Yeah.
Or I'm sad about my mom, but that has nothing to do with this situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not making me any less patient or less whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would caution people around trying to justify somebody else's behavior if it seems to be different because of the grief that they're going through, and just ask.
Yeah.
If someone had said, hey, is this at all being triggered because of your stuff with your mom? I could have said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And meant it.
Yeah.
But the assumption of that almost felt like it was like a dagger on top of all the wounds, the 1,000 cuts I was already trying to heal.
Yeah.
Oh, and now because I am a perpetually sad person, I also have lost my capacity for empathy and compassion and patience and
right. All the other,
they valued me as a human because I'm grieving, that I can't otherwise be a professional person, be a caring person.
Yeah.
And that enraged me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that you can't hold two things at once. I think that, this is a larger conversation about women, I think, because there's this misunderstanding that you can't have emotion and also do all these other things. And so the fact that anything's amiss and people want to blame it on, oh, she's grieving, and yet at the same time, I hear so many people say, I hear so many people for themselves not allow that, who will say, I can't do my job because of this, or I can't still be sad because I have to go back to work. So they don't believe they're able to do both either. And it's you can be really sad, and it doesn't have to be part of your outside world, although recognize that it might be a little bit harder to do the things that you were doing before because you might have less patience, you might have less, but that's not an excuse for the two things. I'm almost, the reality thing, I'm almost glad the woman said maybe it's her mother, just because it's not you don't give the person, you don't blame their whole character. You understand, things might be different because they're grieving, but also I would love and they would never do this, it's not good TV, but I'm wondering if there's a follow-up where she did take responsibility for it. And I think you said something about owning it, and I nodded like crazy, because I'm yes, that's the key, is being able to own when it is and when it isn't part of it. So that blow up on somebody, being able to say, I'm really sorry, that was not you, that was me, not being able to hold both things. And also, this time when I blew up at you was justified. You messed that up, and that had nothing to do with me grieving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because so I was, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the owning piece is the part I think that's important. Knowing when it is that and knowing when it isn't, and being able to stand firm in both of those things.
Yeah. At the time I was teaching, and are just so much better at so many things. Yeah. And we need to get out of the way sometimes. I tell you,
they're just not afraid of feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was teaching fourth graders. So these are 9 and 10-year-olds. And read aloud was one of my favorite times of the day.
Yeah.
Sitting with kids and getting to read a chapter book, a novel, and talk about what's going on and watch their reactions and hear their perspectives. Best time of the day. And surprisingly, in fourth grade, is a concept that starts getting introduced into books because they developmentally have the capacity to start to understand that and to process some of that, abstractly at least. And I never realized what a theme it was until suddenly I'm reading this book about this kid whose mom passed and he's so upset he can't relate to his dad and his dad doesn't know what to do. And there would be moments that I would just close the book and say, okay, bring this up there. And the kids knew it was early. And so I would be like, all right, you guys have some free time or go ahead and draw. You can read independently. And every so often, there would be a kid like, but why? What's going on? Right?
Yeah.
And I needed a beat before I needed to kind of gather myself so that I could explain, I'm feeling really upset about my mom. This is bringing up a lot of sad feelings. And I don't want to cry right now. So we're just going to come back to this tomorrow.
Yeah.
But before I even had the time to do that, another student would just kind of tap them and say, I think she's sad about her mom.
Yeah.
I think right. And so there
Yeah.
are those ways that it's like, that interrupted my work. That impacted my work. But the kids were able to get it. And and when I was ready, I was able to say, sometimes there are going to be moments where I don't expect this to happen, but wow, I am suddenly really, really sad. And that's not helpful in this moment to be able to I can't feel all of that in this time and space. So we got to
you students shouldn't have to be part of it either. Like, what a great lesson. This is like a whole other podcast episode, but what a great lesson for them in emotional regulation of being like, hey, this is happening. So I'm going to be honest with you about what's happening, but also it's not your job to help me or fix it or make it better. So I'm going to reel myself in and we'll get back to this tomorrow. Like, what an amazing, I wish every adult with kids in their vicinity did that, because we don't. And we leave the kids being like, what the heck? What just happened?
Yeah.
What do we do to make that happen? Because
exactly,
we feel really uncomfortable now and we don't know why the teacher just did that. And so you gave them such a gift by being like, I'm sad and I don't want to take it out on you guys. So yeah, that's huge. I know I was teaching too when I lost my mom, and they were 8th graders, and same stuff. They would check in on me. They're the best. They're just the best. And I think it's largely because they're not as uncomfortable, even in 8th grade, they're not as uncomfortable with real human emotion. And they also don't have the life experience to be afraid that it's going to take over. They get that you can be sad and also play a lacrosse game, or that you can be sad and whatever, and read and do a read out loud, or that a read aloud might make you sad, but that doesn't mean that the whole day is gone. They just get that. Sometimes I think adults have forgotten that somehow. They've had enough bad experiences that they're afraid of bad experiences, and so they don't even allow them in at all. Whereas kids are like, it's all good.
Yeah. But that brings up something that I didn't see coming about grief when it came to my family. I suddenly was like, I need everybody to just sit still. I can't have anyone else be in, no one else can die. No one else can get sick. No one else can, don't do anything to end up in the hospital because you were fooling around. I just need everybody to sit down, be still. Yeah, exactly. So there is sometimes that natural fear that comes up that keeps you existing and not living, because you just don't want another bad thing to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if we don't do anything, if we just stay in our regular routine, we don't step outside of it, then maybe we do have control over this, which no, there's no control. You never had control.
Right. And I think that's a massive piece of grief, is that I don't know if it's a quest for control or if it's just a reminder that you don't have it and now you're desperate to get it again. But yeah, that can be a huge impediment to moving through. is if you get kind of fixated on, well, I'm going to prevent it. I'm going to prevent this next time, or I'm going to prevent. I lost both my parents to cancer at different types, and I definitely had a period of my young adult life where I was like fixated on whatever I needed to do to not get cancer. And then, two people in my husband's family got it young, healthy, did everything right, and both got it anyway. And I was like, what am I doing?
Yeah,
I'm wasting so much of my life trying to prevent something that I really actually don't have any. I mean, I'm not going to smoke, but other than that, I don't really have a lot of control. But you can go down a rabbit hole of, because the sort of wellness industrial complex knows that people are feeling this way, and so they prey on that, and they will try to sell you anything and everything to tell you it prevents this disease, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, whatever, when in reality, like 99% of it is true. So that control piece can lead you into some, or at least me, it led me into some, not healthy places, trying to gain some control over things that, you're right, I had no control over. That too. Understanding, like, I can control the things I can control, and the rest of it I have to just let go of and not worry about doing or not doing.
Right.
Yeah.
There's I don't know that, maybe it is peace that I feel now that I'm like, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
There's definitely, and it started, there have been little moments. It's like, there were moments where I laughed really hard at something, and I was like, oh, where'd that come from? Laughter? That feels kind of happy. What? Like, there are these slow moments of starting to feel good again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even looking at a picture and going, oh wow, you look happy there.
Yeah.
Like I don't know that I could recognize it within myself, but I could see it and go, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I still miss my mom. I just, this morning, I was working on a project, and I was just like, I just miss mom. I just want to hang with her.
Yeah.
I just want to hang. She was so much fun to just like, oh man, let's get a coffee, sit down and chat. Hey, you want to go to the stores? Like, I just miss spending that time with her. But I also, which show was it? I wish I could remember what show it was. I was watching something a few weeks ago, and I have a gallery wall in my living room. So there's pictures of me with my mom, and something dramatic happened. And I just turned at the picture and I was like, mom, which is what I did when she was here, because we loved watching TV together. Our text thread is hilarious of like, did you see what happened on The Bachelor? I don't watch it anymore. But like, right, like just breakdowns of every show that we were watching together. We watched The Vampire Diaries and the originals, and we're like, oh my gosh, Klaus is out of control. Like, it's hilarious to see that in text message.
Yeah.
Out of context, you're like, wait, what? Because I'll go through the file, like, and like, what's the Netflix password? I'm like, I know mom said it to me, so I'll just search for password in our text messages, and then I'll be like, FYI, show starts at 8. Okay, cool. I'll catch you on commercials.
Yeah.
But so I'm watching this show, and I'm looking at her picture, and I'm just talking to her. I'm like, mom, what? She's like,
did you see that?
Yeah. And that didn't feel sad. That felt like she was here.
Yeah.
And so there are definitely so many moments now of, bummer, wish she was here.
Mm-hmm.
But my whole body doesn't feel like collapsing into the fetal position and pulling the covers over my head. In feeling that, it's almost just like the wind blew by.
Yeah, it's moments instead of every moment. It's moments that come and go. Yeah, I was thinking back to that, like, it's love, grief is love that has nowhere to go. I think as your world expands and you're able to see the things more, you do have a place for much of that love to go, but there's always part that there's a void. And I think that's the sort of enduring, here I am 20 years out. And there was a while where I kept thinking, like, I can't believe I still feel these things. Even in my own head, I thought, well, there will be a time where I don't feel this anymore. But that's never going to happen. Like, there's always going to be some sadness. There's always going to be a wishing she were here. Things are going to happen that I wish she could see. That's always coming. But you're right. The sort of overwhelming, I miss every single minute of every day. It's all I can think about. It's all I can. And you might even have a day like that still. At least I do.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have a day like that. And they're never the ones you think they're going to be, at least for me. They're never a birthday or an important day. It's just like, oh, I woke up today and I really wish she was here. And I can't stop thinking about it. And I'm going to go to bed wishing she was here. And then, you're okay the next day. So it's always random, I think. But accepting that, like, this isn't going away, and getting through it isn't like the erasure of it. It's more, did I grow around it? And so that it's not as overwhelming every day. There's room in my life for more than just this now. Where in the beginning, there's no room for anything but the grief.
Yeah. Yeah. It's my brother's kids are all teenagers. The oldest is 20, so he's just skipped out. And my mom was so fun when we were teenagers.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, you all are missing the best of Mimi, which is what they called her. It's like my mom, when we were little, she was more strict and like, hey, like she had to impart the wisdom and the rules and the values and everything else that she needed on us. But as we got older, she started to kind of loosen a little bit because she knew that she'd laid the foundation. And so like, okay, they can make
them now.
Decisions, right? They can be responsible for some of these choices.
Right. Whether they're right or wrong, it's up to them.
Exactly. And so it's a bummer that the kids don't get to experience that version of her because of like, you all didn't get to see the like full scope of her. And it's such a missed opportunity. And so, there are those moments where you're just like, oh, you don't even know. Like, you don't even know what
you don't even know what to miss. Yeah.
And meanwhile, my brother and I will talk about things and we're like, oh yeah, like Mom definitely knew that we did XYZ, but she played it cool. She played it cool, held it for like 8 years, and then in the middle of a dinner conversation, just like slid it in there, like, oh, so that time that XYZ happened. And we're like,
right. I'm like, can we still get in trouble? Like,
so yeah.
So good.
It's really nice to be able to get excited to reminisce and tell stories and to think about the like, oh man, it's a bummer she's not here because it would have been so cool. And to say that with a genuine smile instead of just feeling the heartbreak of that.
Yeah. I've found that some of what the shift for me was that I feel sad for her that she's missing this. Like there's a little bit of a difference, I think, in I wish you guys could know her, because I have those moments too where I wish my kids could know her. But also I think, man, she would have really dug this one. Like, I have kids and I'm like, she would have really liked this one. I wish she could have been around for him.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, it's an adventure. That's for sure. But I think, I always like to give people something to like latch on to. So do you have a thing you did or a thing you noticed you were doing without really knowing that somebody can be like, okay, good, that's something to look forward to, or that gives me some hope that I'm not going to always be in this moment, either something you think they should do or something that came up for you that they can sort of look forward to in this.
So I talked about how I am a verbal processor, and for the longest time, my mom was the container for that. My therapist recommended, she's like, well, do you talk to her? And I was like, I don't know what you mean. And she's like, whether it's that you write notes, that you just talk as if she's here. And I didn't recognize that I started doing that,
Mm-hmm.
but it definitely makes a difference because it varies. For the most part, it is just for the same way I talk to myself all day. I'm like, well, I can talk to me. Hey, mom, I have this thing, right? And so
Yeah.
I do talk to her a bit. And then I also started to, when I was buying my house, I was so stressed out. Talk about needing to like
Needing your
process.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also I still get sad about like the un the like the unknown design ideas. My mom would have been like, hey, so have you thought about doing this? You know, because I think in the way that moms can like overstep sometimes, you're always like, but I kind of want it.
Right. I'm ready for it now.
Yeah. Tell me where to put the bowls in the kitchen. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Right. So as I was going through the home buying process, I started to do voice memos, but I never listened to them.
Okay.
It was just about like I was in the car on the way somewhere and being like, okay, so here we go. And I'm feeling lots of feelings and just letting it out. And recently I listened back to one of them, which was a doozy. But it was amazing because I was like, oh yeah, that's a conversation with my mom. Like all of the insecurities, all of the things that I'm like, but I'm worried that if I say it to somebody else, they won't get it or they'll judge me and it's definitely been helpful to continue to talk to her. And when people say like, think about what you think they would have, like, what do you think your mom would have said? That feels so stupid to me because it's not tangible in that I can't tell you that my mom would have said these specific words.
Right.
I know that she would have encouraged me. And I know that she would have found the theme amongst all of the ramblings and been able to say, this is the thing that needs to be figured out. And once that thing is figured out, you're going to feel calmer about these other things. I know the process and the theme in which how she would approach a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that the more that I'm able to actually do that for other people, the more present she feels. So with my nieces, with my nieces specifically, they're 15 and 16. They got a lot going on.
Sure. Yeah.
My two youngest nephews are 18 and 20. One just went to college. The other one's raising a kid. There's just a lot happening with all of them.
Adult stuff happening.
And I try to remember how good my mom was at holding space for you to like feel all of your feelings, to not judge them, to not question whether or not there's like validity in how you feel, but to just allow you to like state your piece and to kind of reflect it back for that person to be able to kind of like see it from a different perspective and make their own next choice. And I find myself almost like channeling that energy and trying to do more of that for the people that I love. And it feels like she's here when I do that. So if there are ways that you can almost emulate the best parts of the person that you miss, it does ease things. She used to have a Christmas party. I tried to host that Christmas party and I was like, that was mom's thing. No, actually, that one ended with her. Like there are some of those actual like events and activities that are like, no, that can't, I can't, that's not who I am. Not my calling. It's not my jam. But in terms of the like how she was with people, I can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a perfect way to end, because as you were talking, I was thinking of all the people that come into my office afraid that they can't live up to their parent or they're lost, whatever. And I think you just demonstrated how you aren't saying that. Like, you can't have the Christmas party. No, you can't do that. That's not your thing. And that's okay, because you found the thing of hers that you missed that is your thing. And that makes you guys feel closer to one another. Yeah. I feel like our moms would have been good friends because my mom was that. She was like the mom of all my siblings are much older. And so I was this little kid watching all these kids come in and out of our house and talk about all the things they weren't allowed to talk about with their own parents. That was my mom's role. She was, kind of my sister's friend once described her as Yoda with the vodka tonic. She would just kind of sit in our living room and have all of these, teenagers and all their angsty different things and relationships and, going against their parents and being gay and all the things that they weren't allowed to say at home. That was my mom held space for that. And inadvertently has kind of who I have hoped to become with my kids' friends too. And I think, yeah, you're right. It does make you feel a little closer. I can't be all the things she was, and I don't try to, and sometimes I don't want to be. But there is an element of her that I do try to emulate, and it does make you feel closer. And I think for me also, it helps my kids know her a little. I say like, this is what your grandma was like. She was, she had the revolving door of misfits in our house that she showed up for with zero judgment, and that's kind of what my hope is too. So I think not trying to live up to them or live up to some strange memory you have of them that's perfect and everything's right and all of it's good. It's like find the thing that you miss and that there's nowhere else for that love to go. You don't have somebody that can take her place. So you're trying to fill that with your own action with other kids. And that's a beautiful kids, people, whatever. And that's a beautiful thing. I love that. Yes. I love that. That's a good way to do it. Yeah. So I think sort of generally what we're trying to say to people is there is hope. It's not it always feel like it does in those early days, and allow that to happen too, because that's a necessary part of all this is that early overwhelm and that early like consumption of grief that happens. If you try to push that off, it's coming for you eventually, whether it's right away or not. So allow it in, allow the rage, allow it all, and then know that it doesn't all last forever. It's not going to take over forever, even if it does take over for a little while. So
yeah. It'll be okay.
Yeah. We still get to live.
Yeah. And joy is not a betrayal.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one too. Yeah, joy is not a betrayal. Not being consumed doesn't mean you love them any less. All of those sort of cliches are true. And they're cliches because we actually do feel them, even though we wish we didn't. We all have a moment of thinking those things. And so that's why they've become cliches, I think. So, yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this. It's always first of all, it's always so much fun to talk to you, but also
I love it.
It's such your honesty and openness and willingness to just say all of your experience is so helpful for so many people. So I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me. I hope that anyone who is feeling alone in their grief and in feeling all the feelings understands that there is a bit of that path that only you can walk. No one else can do it for you, but you're not alone. Yeah, that's a perfect distinction, perfect ending to this, because that's true.